When I look at the AI debate over the past year or two, I feel as though we are going through the same cycle we go through with every education technology. Basically, it starts off a whole lot of discussion about how this bright new shiny EdTech is going to be fantastic for everyone. Then there's a whole lot of claims about how it's going to revolutionise schooling and learning will go through the roof. Then there's all those people who said, oh, we're going to use this in the workplace, so it has to be in schools. Then people start to have some concerns. Is this the right thing? Is this not the right thing? So they say, well, let's trial it in a few schools with the notion of if we just educate kids to use it well, it'll work out. Then it slowly seeps into schools and then we end up having to abandon it.
It's really important when we think about AI's impact on education overall to think about how it is being used differently at the differing levels of school. So our study showed that primary school teachers report quite low uses of AI by students. This is really different in secondary schools though, where 50% of teachers reported to us that their students are using AI. Teachers have seen students use it for a range of different reasons, but predominantly they are using it to complete assessment tasks, even when they face restrictions. We've also heard that a common use of AI by students is to complete homework tasks. At the moment, research shows that the scales are tilted towards AI use by students doing more harm than good. So there's a few different reasons for that. The predominant one is that when students are motivated to use AI to do their thinking for them as a surrogate thinker, if you will, and this is something that the teachers that we spoke to in our consultations really emphasise they're seeing in schools, it can actually short-circuit the learning process. So this is something that's called cognitive outsourcing. So for students to learn, there needs to be some type of productive cognitive effort. When students default to using AI to do their work for them, they actually bypass that productive cognitive effort, and that can impact their ability to remember information in the long term. When students use AI to complete work for them, it can produce a really polished output. So for example, a student might type into AI, write me a 500-word essay on World War II and the causes of World War II. It's highly likely that AI is going to be able to produce quite a slick piece of work. A student might hand that into their teacher. If a teacher were to mark it though, there's no way for them to untangle from that what the student has actually learned and how that is represented in the work, and where AI has been maximally helpful in producing this task for the student. This has been referred to as a mirage of false mastery, and what that means is that AI can give an illusion that students are learning when in fact they're not transferring information into their long-term memory.
If you actually look at the evidence, there is no large, wonderful, positive impact on AI that people can point to in education. If we look at the research, it's actually quite clear the cognitive outsourcing, the false mastery, the problems with basically getting students to use AI to do their work for them. We see there's actually very little upside to AI, and yet still there are all these people saying we have to get it into schools, and school leaders and teachers are telling us they feel pressure to get more AI into schools. It's easy to get hooked up in the technology and how incredibly powerful and innovative artificial intelligence is. But at the end of the day, in the same way that we don't think it's great for students to have a tutor do their work for them, or a student to have their older sibling or parents do their work for them, we shouldn't pretend that having artificial intelligence write a kid's essay is somehow them doing well at school. It doesn't substitute for actual learning. It doesn't substitute for gaining new knowledge and skills and understanding.
One of the biggest ways that AI can harm education is that it can jeopardise assessment integrity, and teachers are really aware of this. Through our study, when we spoke to teachers, we heard from them that they're having to think of ways to design and administer assessment tasks so that they can actually verify that a student's work is their own. The main ways that they're doing that is by bringing assessment back into the classroom. So we heard from teachers that they are asking their students to complete assessment tasks via pen and paper or equivalent hard copy materials in class under supervised conditions, because that's the most decisive way that they can tell that the work that a student's doing is their own. I think it's really unfair when we hear this phrase, oh, teachers will just know that a student has used AI. AI is a really sophisticated technology. It's incredibly hard for a teacher to be able to spot all the time whether students have used AI to produce their work. And what we actually heard from teachers when we spoke to them is that it can take a really long time to invest this extra effort when they're marking students' work to verify that work is a student's own. Some teachers actually told us that for them, AI offers efficiency gains, and that's a really fair way to think about AI as a teacher tool, but the amount of time they have to put into verifying students' work as their own is actually cutting into that time that they might get back. When we think about AI's impact on education overall, to think about how it is being used differently at the differing levels of school. So our study showed that primary school teachers report quite low uses of AI by students. This is really different in secondary schools. When students complete senior secondary school, assessment comprises two different functions. So there's end of year exams. They're often done under examination conditions, so supervised conditions. And then there's something that's called school-based assessment. This is assessment that the schools have individual autonomy over. Sometimes there's restrictions and guidelines given to them from the education system, but the decisions about what the design and administration of that assessment looks like largely sits with schools. This is where AI can have the greatest impact on assessment integrity, because at the moment in some education systems, school-based assessment can be done at home, it can be done in different types of conditions that don't always mean that a teacher is able to easily verify that a student's work is their own.
If we no longer believe that a student's mark at the end of their secondary school represents their actual work, if we lose faith in the marks awarded to students across a state, across the country, if we wonder and believe that we know some students are using AI and some students are not, and therefore some students are being unfairly graded, then we lose faith in the whole system. Right? That is the most urgent issue that we need to address to ensure that people do not lose faith in upper secondary education.
Whilst our report is saying that there needs to be tightening around assessment, particularly at the senior secondary years, we are absolutely not advocating for schools to abandon and move away from really important tasks like essays. These things allow students to communicate complex ideas. They require them to organise their thinking in a way that you don't see in other types of assessment tasks. They're really rich ways to measure students' learning, and it's incredibly important that they stay, especially in those lower secondary years. What that means is that to some degree in the lower secondary years, there's probably going to be some assessment tasks that students complete that have slightly higher levels of AI susceptibility than what others do. That is okay, so long as schools are thinking about the suite of assessment tasks that students are completing across their schooling experience, so that they have got different ways that they're measuring students' learning, and they can trust that the data that they're getting from assessment is an accurate representation of what students have learned. Not only are students using AI in schools, but so are teachers and school leaders. So through our study, we found out that about 3/4 of teachers and school leaders told us that they're using AI for work. Most are using it at least weekly, and the vast majority of those, about 84%, are using ChatGPT, which is a general purpose type of AI. When we asked teachers how they're using AI to support their work, they told us that they're using it predominantly to develop curriculum resources. So of those that are using AI for work, 3/4 of them are using it to develop curriculum resources. So when I was a teacher, the workload was immense. I was looking for ways that I could reduce the amount of time that I needed to spend planning for lessons, just so that I could feel up to date, or even just to catch up with the work that I could feel piling up on my desk. For that reason, I can really understand why teachers are using general purpose AI to help with their work. And there are instances where it can actually be helpful, and this is something that education leaders and school leaders should pay attention to. So for example, there is promise coming from education-specific, tailor-made AI tools that can help teachers assess students' learning and mark that learning and provide feedback in a way that's both really efficient to the teacher's time and keeps them involved in the activity. It's a phrase that's referred to as keeping a human in the loop, and that's really central for AI tools in education to support teachers' work. However, when teachers are using general purpose AI to design curriculum resources writ large, because these tools don't draw exclusively from the evidence base about how students learn best, they can often default to lesson plans that aren't high quality. So often they're activity-led. They'll front load classes with all the activities students will do, rather than focusing and centering on the core knowledge and related skills that students need to learn that will best promote them to remember information.
We shouldn't pretend that, therefore, there is no effective use of AI in schools in the same way that there is effective use of AI in other organisations. There is a large amount of efficiencies that can be gained in administrative tasks, in the operations of a school, that I think actually are under-realised at the moment from our data. Also, there are some very promising signs about using specific education AI tools in assessment, in supporting teachers' professional development and so on, although the latter is in very early stages. But we can see the promise there, and that's obviously an area where further investments can have real important payoffs for schooling generally.